Right. Not number one.
Thank you. Please be seated. So we're back on the record. You remain under oath, and thank you, Mr. D'Angelo.
Thank you, Madam.
You're welcome.
Agent Soraya, if it was determined that Officer Moore fired 7 shots from inside zone car 217 and 12 outside 217, we take the 12 casings and add it to the 9 from Officer Patrick, there would be about 21 shots fired at the Malibu from the passenger side of 217, correct?
Yeah.
And the documentary evidence and the testimony, the judge probably knows the answer right now, and I should ask him, but whatever the number is, the evidence speaks for itself, right?
Yes, sir.
That's the general area where those shots were coming from, correct?
Yes, sir.
As I recall the examination of Agent McNeely, I think every casing except those attributed to Diaz was found within a 45-foot radius of the center of the Malibu. I may be misremembering that testimony. I'll check my notes, but so I trust you agree though with this general proposition.
Relatively close, yes, sir.
Okay. Pardon my interruption.
Agent Soraya, just so I'm clear on the search for any weapon that may have been discarded by the occupants of the Malibu. The incident occurred on November 29, 2012, around 11 p.m. So when was it that there first was a check for weapons in any area, other than the shooting scene?
As I recall, they sent officers back down, excuse me, back down towards the exit off of I-90 at 72nd to check that area, that grassy island where it went off-road a little bit.
Approximately what time was that?
That would have been into Friday, I'm going to guess.
So this was Thursday night the shooting occurred?
Yes.
So what, the next 24 hours later?
I'm not sure exactly what time in the time frame there. Myself and some of the others, we went out that Sunday.
Okay. So maybe 24 hours or less, other than the shooting scene, there was first an attempt to look for a weapon, correct?
That's reasonable, yes, sir.
I mean, there was some, I think their testimony was there was some activity down by the Justice Center looking for casings and all that night, but in terms of the gun itself, that wasn't until maybe 24 hours later. And then the following day, I think you indicated that there was also efforts made. When was the next effort made other than the East 72nd and I-90 location?
Like I said, myself and some others, we participated on that Sunday. Off the top of my head right now, I don't recall if anybody went out on Saturday anywhere along the way either.
So that's maybe 2-3 days later, you and, I think you were saying Commander Chura?
Yes, sir.
So you were walking in the area of Quigley, was that it?
Quigley up to the roundabout, yes, sir.
Okay. Would it be a fair statement that other than finding the weapon secretly in an area where no one discovered it, the likelihood is that in all these particular locations, if there was a weapon in plain view and no one had turned it in, someone just took it, if there was a weapon? Objection.
So, if I understand the question, if there was a weapon, given that you didn't find it, would it stand to reason that some person just picked it up and walked away with it? Am I more or less paraphrasing the question?
Yes,
I think that question is fine, so it's overruled.
That's possible.
And if there was a weapon, and obviously one was not turned in by a person doing good, then it would have had to have been secreted in some location, not in plain view where no one detected it, right? I mean, if there was a weapon.
I don't understand exactly.
Well, in other words, if there was a weapon in plain view, someone could have just picked it up and not turned it in, right?
Yes, sir.
And the other scenario would be that if there was a weapon and it was not in plain view, then obviously whenever it was ditched, it was thrown out in an area where it was hidden.
Yes, sir, that's possible as well.
And your efforts to walk through that area did not yield any positive result for a weapon, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So that's now maybe 3 days later, and then when's the next effort made to locate a weapon? Do you recall?
No, sir. After that, I was involved in interviews.
Okay. There were some efforts made by the Sheriff's Department, a dive team or whatever, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I'm just trying to get the picture. Agent Soraya, did BCI obtain a report from the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department relative to the efforts to deploy their dive team to attempt to locate a weapon?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I just showed the state the report. May I approach, Your Honor?
Sure.
Would it be a fair statement from reading the Sheriff's Department report attached to the BCI report that this operation was on December 27th and 28th, 2012?
Yes, sir, it is.
So that would have been about almost a month after the incident, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in the areas in the Cuyahoga River that were searched in other areas, did it ever come to your attention that there were black water conditions in their efforts to conduct the search?
As I recall, I know there were times there was very low visibility.
Right. There were bottom entanglements, currents, and shore entanglements. And it was basically unsafe, so they did what they could, but they didn't find a weapon and they got the hell out of there. Excuse me. Right? Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, sir.
Now, you testified that Officer Hummel was asked to come back for a second interview based upon the review of his cell phone information and his text messages, correct?
As I recall, yes, sir.
And in fact, for the second interview, did Mr. Sweet, what's his title? Dennis Sweet?
At the time?
Yes.
At the time, he was Special Agent Supervisor.
Okay, and what's his title now?
He is Special Agent in charge of Northern Ohio.
Okay, so he's a high-ranking official at BCI, correct?
Yes, sir.
And to your knowledge, was there a request made of me to bring in Officer Soraya? Officer Hummel.
I believe it was, yes, sir.
Okay, and based upon some of the text messages involving the president of the union allegedly telling Hummel to shut his mouth, was there concern about following up on that line of text messaging?
I believe there was, yes, sir.
Okay. And was there conversation directed towards me on that subject?
As I recall, that was addressed, yes, sir.
And was it determined that I wouldn't even have the union present for that interview if Officer Hummel wanted to use me as his counsel? I would just go in there alone with Mr. Sweet?
I believe that was, yes, sir.
And he personally called me alone into his office, and that arrangement was made. Do you recall that? All right, I'll move on. I just wanted to establish that the request was made, and we followed up and did what you requested, correct?
Yes, sir.
We produced Hummel. Did he answer all your questions?
Yes, sir.
And it was videotaped?
I believe it was, yes, sir.
Okay. You wanted to have another conversation with Officer Jordan, right, because you didn't get the full story from him the first time, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you brought him in a second time, we produced him, and he submitted to the interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
And both Hummel and Jordan were Mirandized the second time as well.
They may have been.
Okay. And Sergeant Daly, he was brought back for a second interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was done at the request of the prosecutor's office, correct?
I don't know if it was or not, sir. May I approach witness? Agent Sarai, I want to show you a BCI document dated January the 25th, 2013, and ask you to review that if you can. I'm not going to be asking you any questions on the substance.
Is there an exhibit number then?
I'm not marking unless you want me to. I mean, I just want to confirm that.
We would prefer to, I think the record needs it, Your Honor.
If you want an exhibit, I'm happy to mark one.
I don't know why it would. You're not proffering, are you?
No, I'm not.
You're just trying to refresh his recollection about whether somebody was called in for a second interview?
Correct, Your Honor. And at whose request?
Okay, yes, sir.
Did there come a time that Sergeant Daly, one of the supervisors from the 2nd District involved in this pursuit, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did there come a time when Sergeant Daly was requested to come in for a second interview?
Yes, sir.
And what was the date of that?
This is dated 1/25/13.
Okay, so January 25th, 2013. Do you recall when he was interviewed the first time?
He was first interviewed December 26th of 2012.
Okay. And the reason behind the request for the second interview came from questions posed by the county prosecutor's office, correct?
According to this, yes, sir.
Okay. Are you the authoring agent?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. Did that happen?
The interview?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And basically, so you must have had some communication with the prosecutor's office about this case, at the very least in January of 2013, right?
Yes, sir.
And they said, hey, bring Daly back in and ask him these questions. Basically, right?
I don't believe it was phrased quite that way.
But
there were questions that were raised that it was felt that a follow-up should be done.
okay, but this was not initiated by the task force. It was because of input received from the county prosecutor's office that this second interview was arranged.
Yes, sir, according to this.
Okay. Thank you. Throughout the course of the investigation by BCI and the task force members, would you confer with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor, Mr. McGinney, and Assistant Prosecutor, Mr. Bell, from time to time?
Yes, sir.
And on January the 4th, 2013, was there actually a meeting with Supervising Agent Dennis Sweet, members of the BCI investigation team, Mr. McGinty and Mr. Bell, at the BCI offices in Richfield?
They were down there. I don't know the exact date.
Okay. If I may just approach to confirm the date.
Sure.
Just the last paragraph.
State will confirm the date. It's the one in
January 4th?
January 4th. That's my memory. It's the only date, though, that we were there.
Well, you can't testify.
Yes,
Well,
sir.
you can, but not from there.
No one's going to stop him, Judge.
It's got to be that date because there isn't another date.
Well, the witness is about to acknowledge that it was likely that date.
Yes, sir. It's dated here.
Okay, so on January the 4th, right after, the first of the year, the investigation was proceeding. Throughout December, you obtained various witness statements, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so now we're into January, and was it basically a meeting to kind of see where we're at and plan strategies going forward? I don't want any substance, but generally that was...
Generally, yes.
Okay. Agent Soraya, it was established in your direct testimony the dates of the interviews for the various officers, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as I recall correctly, December the 4th. That's when the first interviews were conducted, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was Nan, Moore, O'Donnell, and Saluto, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then the next day was December 5th. Diaz, Demchek, Sobolik, and Tapp, correct?
Yes, sir.
Was Officer Sobolik the 7th officer interviewed in this case?
I don't believe the list I was referencing there, I don't remember the exact time who was done first that day or not.
Good enough, but the question I'm getting to is, after Sobolik's interview, there was information that was provided to investigators that he had observed a Cleveland police officer on the hood of the Malibu at some point in the shooting, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that officer was identified by Officer Sobolik as being Officer Brelo because of a conversation later on, correct?
As I recall, yes, sir.
Okay. So from December the 5th, 2012, through the end of December 2012, did the task force ask myself or Patrolmen's Association to bring any of those officers in who had been previously interviewed to go over any subject matters to what they may or may not have seen?
No, sir.
And then after the interactions with the prosecutors in January of 2013, were there any requests made of BCI to, let's bring these officers back in here and see what they have to say about this subject?
No, sir.
Overruled.
And we know that there was some input, at least from Sergeant Daly, about some questions related to the subject matter of the pursuit. Let's bring him in for a second interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
So again, at any point then towards the end of January, at or near the time of Sergeant Daly's interview, or shortly thereafter, did anyone say, well, let's bring back these other 4, 5, 6, or 7 officers and re-interview them on the subject of what they may or may not have seen relative to the Malibu?
No one else was brought back, no, sir.
Agent Soraya, I'm not sure if you touched on it yet, but the Bracknell Police dash cam was obtained and submitted for analysis to a section of the Attorney General's office for review, correct? That's
For review?
Well, whatever the right word is, for review or to analyze, that's the word.
If it did, Do we know, do you have the name of who would have looked at it?
Yeah, it was sent to the Ohio Crime Investigations Commission for audio enhancement and analysis. Megan Timlin, does that
Yes,
name ring a
okay.
bell?
For the Organized Crime Investigations Commission, yes.
Okay. And the dash cam was sent there to enhance it and also to analyze it by conducting a waveform analysis, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
And there was a report that was generated as a result of that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it was presented from, it was sent down, I believe, by Agent Kolar early on the first week of December. It was sent down to the Organized Crime Commission. They did their review. The report was made, and it was sent back after supervisor approval from the Ohio Organized Crime Commission back to BCI in the task force, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it wasn't sent to the Organized Crime Commission because there was organized crime activity in this case, correct?
That's correct, sir. That's just technical support down there.
And they have the resources to perform these types of analyses, correct?
Yes, sir.
So when you got the report back, it was determined that the entire audible portion of gunfire that was heard on that dash cam video and audio was 17.8 seconds, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Are you aware of that?
Objection.
Or was there
Oh, hold on.
Was there a report that you reviewed relative to the waveform analysis that BCI caused to be conducted in this case?
Yes, sir.
And are you aware of the fact that the report of the waveform analysis determined that the audible portion of gunfire lasted 17.8 seconds?
Objection.
Hold on, sir. The objection is based on what?
Judge, if he wants the individuals who did this report...
No, just an evidentiary basis, not what he wants or doesn't.
This is not the right person.
Can I
But on direct exam, didn't you ask him about a lot of things done by a lot of people at BCI and ask him to give the evidence?
In appropriate situations, Judge, just because something is done one time and doesn't mean it's done the other. Judge, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Well,
he's reading from an expert report here. If he wants the expert to come in and do the expert report, then you should do that.
Yeah, but by way of example, you went over with him where various shell casings were found, who they were attributed to. Well, now, it is true
Here's the report.
it's true that McNeely's testimony is in evidence. But, I mean, I could take an hour to reread his direct from yesterday, but you went into some things with him that were basically conclusions of BCI, generally, not necessarily things that he himself accomplished. And you asked about those. So now the defense is asking about, and I'm paraphrasing, didn't BCI, upon investigation, conclude, well, I know what he's asking him, didn't BCI conclude that the audible portion of gunfire lasted 17.8 seconds? Why can you ask him about what BCI in general concluded, and it's acceptable, it's not hearsay, but the defense can't?
First of all, Judge, you're mixing apples to oranges. What I asked about McNeely is where the casings were found. That's not an expert opinion. That's just a fact that was determined during the course of the particular investigation. What Mr. D'Angelo is trying to do...
Yeah, but it wasn't determined by him and by his measurements. We certainly already have it in evidence, and I'm not saying that that is the best example. That's one that comes to mind. But
if I could shortcut, if he wants to show him the report, I don't remember there were several measurements and they were all very, very close. If he wants to show them to him and it says this is a BCI report, fine with it.
I just want to...
Well, here, why don't we do that? In other words, then, if you show the witness what you're reading from, although you have described it, apparently the state will essentially waive this objection.
Your Honor, just to add just a little bit so the state can know where I'm going. I'm not offering the report in evidence, although it's on the defense portal. It was provided in discovery in this case. I'm just simply trying to establish Their analysis was done. This was the length of time of the gunshot detected. There was a pause and the length that they determined the pause, and then a second volley and the length of that, and I'm done with it.
Well, I understand.
That's all I'm trying to...
I thought that I understood what you were trying to get in evidence. I didn't surmise that you wanted the entire report in evidence, but I understand that his objection. Apparently, it's likely to be waived. Just make sure you show him the report and either refresh his recollection or let him read it for the first time.
I could pull up the report on the portal, but I just have a summary of it that's in the prosecutor's summary prepared by Agent Kolar, provided to Prosecutor McGinney.
In your work on this case, did you read Timlin's report?
I believe I did, yes, sir.
And was it ever a matter of discussion among you and others investigating this case?
Yes, sir, it was.
How well do you recollect it?
What part of it?
Well, do you recollect it well enough to confidently answer his questions if he asked you, for example, was it determined that the period of audible gunfire was 17.8 seconds?
Yes, sir.
That one you can agree with?
Yes, sir.
How about the next one?
Okay. I was diverted because I was thinking of my conversation with Mr. McGinney. So you just asked him, Your Honor, that the length of time of the gunfire on the audio was 17.8 seconds?
And he's willing to agree with that proposition.
Okay, thank you. And was it determined from the waveform analysis conducted by the Attorney General Organized Crime Commission and Megan Timlin that there was a discernible round of gunfire, the initial volley, that lasted approximately 8.5 seconds?
Yes, sir.
And that was followed by a 1.3 second pause, correct?
Yes, sir.
Then there was an additional shot that was detected in this analysis, followed by a 2.4 second pause, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the final analysis of the length of time for the last number of shots fired, I think that we've been going back and forth on is the 15 or 18 gunshots, was 5.1 seconds.
I believe so.
And that the audio analysis was able to detect a minimum of 79 distinct shots in total.
I believe that was the number, yes, sir.
Okay. And then the concluding sentence in the summary report prepared by BCI, there was no way of determining an actual or maximum number due to some shots possibly occurring near simultaneously.
Yes, sir.
You agree with that?
Overruled. Did you see that in the report?
I recall that, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
On the one hand, one is saying, hey, we'll basically waive. The other is saying we object. But overruled.
Your Honor, in this case, we agree with the higher authority of the two here.
Thank you, Mr.
Once again, I appreciate your attempts to inject some levity into the series.
I try. Agent Sarai, I'd like to conclude by going over some of your testimony about your interview with Officer Brelo, okay?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this point, given the direct examination, the defense is requesting that we play the interview of Officer Brelo in its entirety.
The entire thing from start to finish?
Yes, Your Honor.
Based on what rule of evidence?
Your Honor, the state used a portion of it, and the testimony involved basically the entire interview, and we feel that in terms of completeness and the best evidence rule that the court should have before it the entire interview. Again, we're not dealing here with a jury trial. The court is sophisticated as to the weight to attach to this and how to treat it. But I think it's a fair recitation of this witness's testimony that he basically testified about the entirety of that interview, and we would ask that it be played.
The witness was asked on direct examination about personal observations, in this case what he heard. He testified to many of the things that he heard. You are welcome on cross-examination to inquire about what other things he might have heard or didn't hear, especially to add context and completeness to his testimony. But it is not proper to just play the entire thing through. For example, you can queue up, 5 or 10 seconds and say, I'm trying to think of something he said yesterday. Well, one of the things he mentioned yesterday was that the defendant said he doesn't remember anything, and I'm paraphrasing, from between being behind 238 to turning off the Malibu. Now, I don't know what he said in his statement, but you may want to cross-examine him by saying, well, didn't he also say this about that interval? And you can play the 5 or 10 seconds, that kind of thing. So you're welcome to, if you want, use the video to cross-examine, but we're not going to have press play at the start and press stop at the end and then ask him questions.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Judge, we would object regarding that procedure. I know the court is well aware of State versus Kimmey. Okay.
Hold on one second. I don't need State versus Kimmey to tell me what Rule 801D2 says. This witness testified, as I mentioned, about personal observations, namely things he heard.
Correct.
Like any witness, he can be cross-examined about what else he heard that he didn't mention, or what he didn't hear, or what he testified he had heard in context with another thing that he might have heard. So it is perfectly acceptable to go over other things that were said, or for that matter not said, to test this witness's perceptions, to test his credibility if he omitted something that should have reasonably been included in an answer to your question, and those kinds of things. So it is certainly, I didn't know you were going to give me a case that stood for the proposition that a defendant could not proffer his own pretrial statement as substantive evidence in his portion of the case. Of course, I know you can't do that. But he is welcome to use the statement in cross-examining this witness about what he heard or didn't hear on December, I think it was 10th, 2012.
Judge, note our objection and note the fact that we disagree with the court's interpretation of the rules of evidence. Okay, because a party opponent cannot put on their statement, recorded or written, and you're letting them put on at least portions of that. Nobody's disagreeing with the fact that they can cross-examine on their perceptions and things of that nature. But they can do that without going to a recorded statement. And it specifically says, as far as regarding a recorded statement, that statements, that the rule connotes statements that are written and are recorded, not conversations. So just note our objection, and we believe the state's interpretation of this rule is incorrect. Thank you.
The state's interpretation is incorrect. Here, that's what you said. I know what you meant.
Right.
I know what I'm doing. So you are welcome to proceed in that fashion. But as I said, we're not going to start and then stop at the end.
Thank you, Your Honor. That interview of Officer Brelo was conducted by yourself, Agent Soraya, and also Detective Sergeant Scott Gardner from East Cleveland, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it was tape recorded?
Video recording, yes, sir.
Video recording. I'm sorry. And that was on December the 10th,
I believe it was, yes, sir.
2012. And Did you inquire of Officer Brelo and his background in that interview?
Yes, sir.
And he told you that he was in the Marines, correct?
Yes, sir.
You had asked him that? And that was from 2003 till 2010?
Yes, sir.
That he was appointed to the Cleveland Police Department in 2007, correct?
I believe it was, yes, sir.
And he's been a Cleveland police officer at that time for about 5 years, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that he was in Iraq in 2005, correct?
I believe that's the time, yes, sir.
You made inquiry whether he was involved in any prior shootings, correct?
Yes,
in
sir.
that interview? And you did that with your other interviews, correct? Because it basically filed a format that the task force members determined, correct?
That is correct, sir.
So the questions that were assembled were done by the investigative team, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the decision was made to ask all interviewees these types of questions for purposes of uniformity and comparison, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you asked of Officer Brelo whether he had ever been involved in an incident where a gun was fired, and he indicated that there was one where his partner had accidentally discharged her weapon into another suspect car, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was, it was determined in that case, there's been testimony in this case that they were given non-disciplinary re-instruction as to how to approach a vehicle, correct?
Yes, sir.
But it was not Officer Brelo who had discharged his weapon there, correct?
That is correct.
And throughout all this time, you inquired, and from all the time that Officer Brelo was in Iraq, he had never fired his weapon there, correct?
That is correct.
And from your participation in this case as one of the lead agents, you've discovered, have you not, that we've been provided the military records that the state subpoenaed in this case relating to Officer Brelo, correct?
No, I did not know that,
You weren't
sir.
aware of that? Okay. Did Officer Brelo indicate to you that while in Iraq that he and his fellow Marines were the subjects of direct and indirect rocket and mortar fire?
Yes, sir, he did.
And that usually there was advance notice, and you'd have about 20 or 30 seconds to escape that type of assault, correct?
Yes, sir, he did.
And the events in this case stood in contrast because this was so unpredictable, correct?
Yes, sir, it was a lot more immediate.
He advised, pursuant to your questions, that he heard the initial broadcast of Officer Nan, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that it was to the effect of a weapon having been fired at Officer Nan in the area of police headquarters?
Yes, sir.
And that he and his partner responded, and when they did, they responded lights and sirens, correct?
Yes, sir.
And without going through all the pursuit, the interview established, as it did with others, the direct path that Officer Brelo took and what position he was in this pursuit, correct?
Yes, sir. He recalled the streets that they were on.
Okay. And you inquired whether he heard any broadcasts, correct, during that pursuit?
Yes, sir, I did.
And he advised that he had heard broadcasts from other officers, correct?
Yes, sir.
And those included the actions of the occupants of the vehicle allegedly brandishing and displaying and pointing a weapon at pursuing police officers, correct?
Yes, sir.
And ultimately, the procession winds up into East Cleveland, and as Officer Brelo and his partner are driving, I believe it was one of the streets there. He doesn't recall the name of the street, correct? When he was in East Cleveland, Officer Brelo didn't remember if it was Wymore or whatever street he went up to get to the school.
That's correct, sir.
You recall he spoke about the lack of visibility due to all the dust and the issue about the road was under construction, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that throughout the broadcast, Officer Coleman could be heard making broadcasts, correct?
Yes, sir.
And one of them was that it looked like the passenger was reaching down and possibly reloading a weapon, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did Officer Brelo indicate that as he was pulling up, he heard on the radio shots fired?
Yes, sir, as they were entering into the parking lot, going down what he described as the dusty road.
And he advised that as he proceeds into the parking lot, he's going lights and siren, correct?
Yes.
And as he proceeds into the parking lot there at the school area, he's behind another vehicle, which
I think ultimately proves to be, was it 238?
He did not know what car he was behind when he pulled in. There were cars in front of him.
I think that car was either was it to his right that he testified, and then he wound up, the car went the opposite way he thought, and then Brelo went the other way, and he came to rest where it's located here.
As he's pulling in, he noticed the zone car off to his left, and he pulls up to the right and parks there.
okay.
And immediately he sees a car approaching with its headlights, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he had already heard the gunfire, correct?
He heard the shots fired call as he's putting his car in park. He looks up and sees the Malibu coming at him, and sees it collide with 238, and then immediately hears gunfire from the area of the Malibu.
Okay. And at that point, both Officer Brelo and his partner, Officer Moore, began to fire through their windshield, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they, Officer Brelo indicated that they had received ambush training, and that's what they were taught to do.
Yes, sir.
Now, based on your experience with weapons, is it pretty loud when you fire a Glock 19 or a Glock 17 from inside a zone car through a windshield?
It would be loud inside a passenger compartment of any vehicle.
Okay. Would that be something that would be pretty horrifying to most people, to be in that position?
I don't understand your question.
Well, if, based on all these broadcasts and the pursuit, you hear shots fired as you're coming into that driveway, you see a car coming at you, and all of a sudden shots are coming at you that you think are coming from the suspects. Would that make you afraid?
Yes.
Would that make you think that you may get killed?
Yes, sir.
And just the act of firing your weapon through the windshield would be a highly unusual and unpredictable occurrence in a police officer's life, right?
Yes, sir.
So would that be for lack of a better way to put it, a pretty horrifying experience for Officers Moore and Brelo inside the passenger compartment?
Objection.
17.
Sustained.
Would you find that, if you were in that position, that would be pretty horrifying to you?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes, sir, that would be.
Would it scare the hell out of you?
Objection.
Well, again, we should keep our language unless we're quoting civil, but the gist of the question is acceptable, so the objection's overruled.
That would be very intense, yes, sir.
And very loud, correct?
Yes.
Did Officer Brelo indicate to you in the interview that he had a little difficulty hearing out of his right ear because of all the gunfire?
Immediately afterwards, yes, sir.
He indicated that he thought he and his partner would be killed, right?
Yes, sir.
And it was his recollection that he fired 5 or 6 rounds and he thought his weapon jammed on, correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, we covered this before, but not every officer's recollection was accurate about the number of rounds that they fired, correct?
That's correct, sir.
At that time, did Officer Brelo state to you that he and his partner got out of their vehicle?
Yes, sir.
And they did so because the car's a coffin and they didn't want to get caught in there and shot up?
Yes, sir.
And your investigation revealed that
That his perception was accurate, that bullets were flying at that time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And there was physical evidence that the passenger side mirror 217 was shot off, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
So Officer Brelo,
Indicated in the statement that he reloaded, he gets out of the vehicle, fires at the Malibu, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then he takes a position behind zone car 238.
He fires as he moves.
and there's shell casings found in that general area consistent that, you know, Brelo must have fired somewhere in that area, correct?
Yes, sir.
Whether it was
Exactly there, because we also know that he winds up firing from 238, correct? And then ultimately also from the hood of the Malibu, correct?
Yes, sir.
So there's shell casings found throughout this area that corroborates that fact.
Yes, sir.
how the casings came to their final conclusion,
Whether they bounced from part of zone car 238 onto the hood of the Malibu, onto the pavement, and whether they hit the pavement and rolled a little bit, cannot be determined, but there were a lot of shell cases of Officer Brelos found in this immediate area, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, did Officer Brelo indicate to you that as he is behind 238, he's terrified, correct?
Yes, sir. That was the word he used.
And did he also indicate to you that he thought that his car was a little bit farther back from the Malibu? It wasn't like right up to it, nose to nose?
When presented with the map, I believe his statement was he didn't think the Malibu was still in contact with 238.
Right. Well, that was one thing, but then he also stated in general terms that he didn't think he was as close as it was depicted on the map that was presented to him.
I believe
217.
he may have, yes.
Right. So it was something slight, but it wasn't a major distance that he felt it was not quite accurate as he remembered, but that was his best recollection, correct?
Yes, sir.
But he also indicated that he did not believe at that time that, and again, this is December the 10th of 2012, correct?
Yes, sir.
He did not believe that the right front passenger side of the Malibu was as close to the passenger door of 238 as it was depicted on the map that was presented to him, correct?
Yes, sir. That's what I said. He didn't realize it was still in contact with the vehicle.
Now,
He further told you, did he not, that he was terrified that because of the position he found himself in, that this Malibu could still possibly accelerate and cause him to be trapped underneath 238.
Yes, sir, he did.
Now, this is the Malibu that had led the police on this chase for over 20-some minutes and continued to attempt to flee. So in those seconds, that's what Brelo told you he thought one of the dangers was that he faced, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so Brelo told you that he made a decision to get off the ground and elevate because he didn't want to be trapped behind 238.
Yes, sir.
And gunfire still occurring during that time.
Yes, sir.
I mean, you and I are talking longer than I was expecting last night, but, you know, all this that we draw out in court takes a whole lot longer, doesn't it, than the 17.8 seconds of gunfire that waveform analysis determined, right?
Yes, sir.
So within the context of the fear that's been already testified about and concern about what the Malibu is doing or could do, and within 17 seconds, while gunfire is going, sirens going, and emergency lights flashing, Brelo jumps up on the trunk of 238, right?
Yes, sir.
And he says he did that also because he didn't want his shots to get caught up in the engine block of the Malibu, right?
That was one part of it, yes, sir.
And the other part was he was concerned that he himself could get shot in crossfire, correct?
Yes, sir. He saw the officers off to his left.
And that would give him the direct angle to shoot at the Malibu. He'd have a better vantage point to shoot from an elevated position.
Yes, sir.
So he didn't want to get trapped under 238, he didn't want to get hit with crossfire, and he wanted a better angle of attack to shoot and fire at the Malibu, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he also stated that he recalled that in his Marine experience, the training was you elevate and move towards the target, correct?
I believe he said move through the target, but yes, sir.
Okay.
And during all this time, Officer Brelo indicates that he's terrified that there's still gunfire going on, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he's just firing his weapon, correct? He's looking at the Malibu, he sees movement, and he's trying to neutralize the threat.
Stop the threat, I believe is what he said. Yes, sir.
Okay. And would it be a fair statement that when he's describing these events, that's when he really gets emotional in his statement to you, in his interview?
Yes, sir.
We could play it. It's on page 21 of the transcript and also 23 minutes and 7 seconds into the interview, but I'll represent to you that that's when he's talking about making a decision to get on the trunk of 238, and that's when he starts to cry. You recall that?
I recall him breaking down, telling us the story of his actions.
Do you then say, I mean, you got a heart, right? I mean, you were trying to conduct your business, but you also saw that he was having problems, and you said, no problems, take a deep breath, slow down. You
Yes,
told
sir.
him that, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I did.
And Sergeant Gardner said, do you want a break, right? At that time?
I believe that it was about when the break was offered to him, yes, sir. Give him a chance to recompose.
And Brelo said, I'm okay. I just want to continue. I'll be okay, correct? And so then he continues. And within a minute, are you telling him, it's all right, man, take a deep breath?
I told him that a number of times during the interview, yes, sir.
He was crying, right?
And breathing quite heavily.
And taking slugs of water as he's trying to compose himself and continue on with the interview, because he didn't want to stop. He just wanted to keep going, right?
Yes, sir.
So he tells you he keeps hearing the rounds going off, and then he started comparing it to Iraq again. He goes, I never fired my weapon, I never. And then at that time, again, he's still crying. That's 30 seconds later, and you said, you're fine. You remember telling him you're fine? You remember telling him you're fine?
I remember offering support there for him to calm down and to continue on.
And did he tell you that he's never been so afraid in his life and he just couldn't understand why the suspects were still moving and still shooting at us?
Yes, sir.
Did he tell you that he had tunnel vision?
Towards the end there, yes, sir.
And again, he's still crying when he's telling you this, right?
I believe he was.
And then, as he says he's shooting and shooting, the next thing he remembers is
Being on the driver's side of the Malibu, putting the car in park, and taking the keys out and throwing them on the windshield of the Malibu.
He says he's standing at the driver's door. He was asked if he fired any rounds from there. He said no. His gun was in his holster. Somebody was hollering, cease fire. He looked around, then reaches in, puts the car in park, turns off the ignition, removes the keys.
And then he continues on, you asked, Sergeant Gardner asked the question, didn't he? When you were at the driver's door, did you discharge a weapon? And he said, no, sir, correct?
Yes, sir.
I have no idea how I got to the driver's door.
Yes, sir.
And at that point, he indicated again that in Iraq, even though he's never been this terrified, he was just uncontrollable at that point. He was really shook up. Officer Brelo was.
He was emotional throughout the interview, yes, sir.
And then again at that point, you tell him for the fourth time, take a deep breath and relax for a little bit, all right? At 27 minutes into the interview. Do you recall doing that?
I recall telling him that, yes, sir. I don't know how far we were into it.
And do you recall me finally turning to him and saying, you know, are you all right? And I actually pat him on the back.
Objection.
Do you recall
Yeah,
that?
well, that's an observation. He was statementizing the party opponent. During the statement, something occurred. The party opponent's counsel apparently, if he agrees with it, felt the need to comfort the witness, and the question is, did you observe that, basically? So he's asking about his observations. So overrule. So I guess, did you observe something to that effect occur?
Yes, sir, I did.
Pardon me.
And then did you, after he composed himself, kind of take him back through the pursuit and ask some general questions again?
Yes, sir. We reviewed his statement to that point. Up to that point, we let him tell us what happened, and then the format of the interviews would be to go back then and start picking up different points for clarification and more articulation on it.
And so ultimately, besides going through some questions on the pursuit, you take him back up to the area where he's entering, almost getting into the driveway, and you asked him, like, you know, how many cars were in front, and he advised that there were about 10 or so, and that you asked him how many behind, and he said that's too many to count. There were flashing lights everywhere. You recall him saying that?
Yes, sir, I do.
And that he went straight in, and you pointed out where 238 and 217 were on the diagram, correct?
I believe that was probably at the time we showed him the map and he made his observation about the contact,
Right.
things like that.
And isn't that also where he said that you asked the question, everything looked the way you can recall it, and he said, I thought the suspect's vehicle was farther back. Recall that?
Yes.
And then you got into the issue of whatever he heard Sergeant Coleman saying at that point. Do you recall that was another area of follow-up?
Of him hearing the shots fired call, I believe he was asked if that was over the radio he heard the shots or if that was actual, he heard the gunfire itself.
Right.
And he stated he heard the radio traffic pulling
Right.
in.
And then also at 33 minutes and 33 seconds into the interview, in addition to the shots fired, you go okay, and then he continues to indicate, so one car goes right, I come here, I believe I hear Sergeant Coleman saying the vehicle had nowhere to go, and then they looked like the suspects in the vehicle were trying to get out of the vehicle. He thought he heard something to that effect?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but he used the words believe. He believed that Sergeant Coleman saying the vehicle had nowhere to go, correct? That was his language that he used?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Then again, you take him through the questions about putting the brake on his car, the headlights coming at him, and the firing of his weapon, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you take him through the reloading the first time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Actually, Brelo only reloaded twice, right? Because the first magazine was already in his weapon, correct?
Correct, sir.
So when he went through that, he ejected it, and then he had to reload for his second magazine. And then when he was done with that, he reloaded for the third magazine. But in essence, he only loaded twice, correct?
Yes, sir. It was 2 reloads, 3 magazines.
Okay. And you confirmed with him again that when he was firing, after he got out of his car, he was moving as he was firing, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you confirmed again, looking to his left, he saw some officers off to his left, correct?
When he was behind 238, he could see about 4 officers back behind 238, and he cites that he can see the hill behind him as well.
Okay. And you you covered with him shooting on 238. He recalls that he was shooting over the light bar, and he was describing that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, he was just saying, I can't believe that they're, still moving, and he couldn't believe that they didn't stop shooting him. That was his statement to you, correct?
Yes, sir.
So then the follow-up questions begin. After he said the next thing he remembers, he's at the driver's side of the Malibu. You asked the question, do you remember getting there? And his answer was, absolutely no idea how, sir. I don't know if I went around the left or the right. I have no idea, sir. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And then Sergeant Gardner interject, at some point did you jump on the suspect's vehicle? And Officer Brelo's answer was, I have no recollection. If I did, sir, I have no recollection. Correct?
Yes, sir.
But did he also say, and I'll cover it later on in the interview, though, he didn't dispute it. He goes, if in fact I was on the vehicle, I'm not denying it. He said he just didn't remember it.
I believe he was asked if he knew that we found a shoe print of his on the car, and I believe he said, it could be, I don't remember being there. Let me correct myself. I believe he said, I don't recall being there.
But he would not dispute that, correct?
No, he didn't argue the point.
And he certainly did not deny that he was on the Malibu, correct?
No, he did not deny it.
Do you remember asking the question, do you remember anyone else yelling anything out there? And he said, absolutely nothing. It's lights and sirens. Shots are being fired. Do you recall him saying that to you?
Yes, sir, I do.
And do you remember you followed up with questions about did his partner, Officer Moore, come up and give him a magazine after the shooting was over?
Yes, I did.
And Officer Brelo indicated that she had come up and given him a magazine, and he wasn't even sure if it was his. And he asked her, why are you doing that? And she said it was habit, that she just picked it up.
Yes.
Do you know in the case, in this investigation, Agent Soraya, were all of Officer Brelo's magazines accounted for and recovered?
I do not know that, sir.
Okay. And as part of your question, you were trying to inquire of all the officers what the lighting conditions were and their ability to see, whether it was dark or light, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you ask the question, all right, you're looking through a lens here. This is your interpretation. What's the lighting like?
Yes, sir, I did ask him that.
And his answer, it was dark. We have the headlights from the zone car. I believe there were street lights. He said that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did he say, though, that it was, even though it was dark and there were lights, he characterized it as somewhere in the middle?
I believe he said somewhere in the middle and that there was sufficient light he could see into the Malibu.
Correct. And you then followed up with questions about when the impact occurred with the Malibu in 238, were rounds being fired, and he said yes, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when he was pulling up the dirt road, you asked him, is that where you heard shots fired, and he confirmed that, correct?
This was where we clarified whether that was radio traffic or actual gunfire he heard.
Right. And he said it was
Radio traffic.
Correct. And you then took him back to whether he saw Sistek or any officer getting out of 238 as he entered in, and he said he didn't see that, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And at that point, he asked to use the restroom, and you said, no problem, the way you've been chugging water, right?
Yes, sir.
So he went and he came back within 2 minutes, and you followed up with more questions, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you were asking questions about how he was firing and if he moved from target to target, or the word you used was transitioning.
Yes, sir.
And he indicated that he doesn't specifically recall, but he does acknowledge that he was shooting at the driver and then moving to the passenger and moving to the driver and back and forth like that, correct?
Yes, sir, he did.
And that you asked him again to try to clean up the issue about the magazines. Did you pick up any of your other magazines? And he said, no, sir. Correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
You asked him one of the standard questions you asked of everyone else, did you fear for yourself and your other officers? He said, yes, that's the most I've ever been in my life, sir, even with Iraq. I've never been more afraid for my life and my fellow officers, sir.
Yes, sir.
He said that? But he also said he thought that they were going to get rammed and that they were going to be shot and killed. Is that what he told you?
Yes, sir.
You asked him whether he thought his actions were consistent with the training he's received, and he said yes?
Yes, sir, he did.
And that's the same question you asked all the other officers too, right?
Yes, sir.
And everyone said the same thing. They thought they acted as they were trained.
Yes, sir.
He admitted that he presented his weapon for weapons inspection, and Lieutenant Tim, you remember the big Irish guy from homicide, he described him?
Yes, sir.
And he said that Lieutenant Tim told him that he had 2 rounds left, one in the chamber and one in the magazine, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Sergeant Gardner asked, just to clarify, so you don't recall if you went on the hood of the suspect vehicle? And Officer Brelo's answer was, no, sir, it's possible, because I was so terrified that I was going to get run over, but I don't recall that, sir. So he said it was possible, he just didn't recall that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Throughout the interview, did Officer Brelo ever try to blame and say, oh, it wasn't me, it was Officer so-and-so that was on the hood, it wasn't me?
No, sir. You didn't project on anybody.
Okay. And then he continued on, he goes, I don't know if I ever went over to the side, I don't know. I've been trying to rack my brain, sir, I have no recollection. And that's when Sergeant Gardner asked the question, so it wouldn't surprise you if I were to say that the footprints that were on the trunk of 238 matched the shoe prints that were on the top of the suspect vehicle? And Officer Brelo said, no, I was so in fear of my life, I wouldn't. I mean, I have no recollection of how I got there, sir. It's just as feasible as me going the other way, too, but he had no recollection.
Yes, sir.
He didn't deny it, though, correct?
You did not deny it, no, sir.
And he said he did all this at the moment. He made a split-second decision of going to a higher angle so he wouldn't get hit, correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall at the end, after again you take him to the side of the Malibu, and he says he took the keys out, that Officer Kindness asked a couple questions?
Yes, sir.
And Officer Kindness asked about the lights and sirens, how many cars and had lights and sirens on, and his answer was every car I saw.
Yes, sir.
And he said it was loud.
Yes, sir, he did.
And again, from your experience as a police officer and investigator, would it stand to reason, given the circumstances of this case, that all these police cars would have their lights and sirens on?
Yes, sir, they would.
Trying to put this fairly.
It's certainly the fact that all these cars have their headlights on, their sirens on, and their emergency flashing lights on. It certainly doesn't mean that, by virtue of that, it's impossible to see anything, correct?
No, you could still see with it.
Right. But on the other hand, it still has a disorienting effect on an officer in this environment and these conditions, correct?
Disorienting, distracting.
And that's what Agent Kolar referred to in his report presented to Mr. McGinney, correct? The
I don't.
backlighting and the strobe effect of the lights?
I
You
don't recall that, no, sir.
But from your experience, that would be a reality of this scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at the end, you discussed with him again, or I actually asked him the question, whether or not he had more time to react in Iraq than he did over in this driveway in East Cleveland, and he said he had more time to react in Iraq.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
his answer?
Yes, sir.
And did he also point out to you that he's had at least 2 or 3 awards where he was able to disarm suspects who had knives without using any deadly force against him? Did he
Yes,
bring
sir,
that to
he
your
did.
attention? He wanted to try to show you that he was not some kind of trigger-happy cop that would use deadly force whenever he had a right to do it, right?
Yes, sir.
Objection. That one's sustained.
Okay. If I may have a moment, Your Honor?
Sure.
Agent Sarai, just on
The part of the interview, did Officer Brelo tell you that it was like instantaneous when the Malibu hit
the car, the door of 238, the gunfire that was erupting?
Yes, sir. He said as soon as the car collided with 238, he heard gunfire and what he said felt to be 10 to 15 feet in front of him, which would have been the Malibu. Excuse me.
And again, did he also tell you that, I mean, it's throughout his report, but he was, his interview, he was terrified, he was afraid for his partner, he thought they were both going to die. He said he had little kids and he thought that it was all over for him.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. D'Angelo. If you are not able, through your own experience, your education, and your training to answer this, then please tell me. But in a situation where bullets are coming from many different guns, is it reasonable not to know for certain what direction they're being fired from and towards?
If you're asking in a situation where there's multiple guns going off, their location and their orientation?
Right. Here's what I'm driving at. There has been testimony that the defendant and others believed the Malibu was firing at them.
Yes, sir.
Given that no gun was ever found in the Malibu, and putting aside whether there ever was one, it's pretty clear there wasn't one in the Malibu in the parking lot. So, is that a reasonable perception when multiple guns are going off to believe they're coming from where they weren't, basically?
Yes, sir. The muzzle orientation and any type of atmosphere will affect the acoustics. You're going to hear the gunfire, you might not know exactly where it's coming from.
And we heard testimony from Detective Graves' partner that on Detroit Road and then again somewhere around 72nd and St. Clair, Detective Graves tried to perform, I think it was called a rolling stop or a rolling block of the Malibu. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, sir, I do.
Is that a technique that is trained and that is considered legitimate?
Yes, sir, it is.
Is it trained and considered legitimate to use your own car as virtually a roadblock?
It is a legitimate thing in the situation at a lower speed to try to get in front of the vehicle and serpentine, try to obstruct their ability to pass. That would come back down to a policy issue, though, whether the agency wants their cars wrecked or not.
All right, well, I guess my question is, let's say this wasn't the case, so this is clearly hypothetical, but let's say the police knew the Malibu was coming over the Detroit Superior Bridge. Would it have been legitimate to line up a couple of cars perpendicular on the other side of the bridge and hope they either stop in time or they crash in and stop?
Only in TV shows. That is not practical at all.
That's what I wanted to know. So thank you. We'll go off the record for one moment. Do you have a rough estimate on your redirect?
10 minutes, Your Honor.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back at 10 till, but what we'll try to do is conclude this witness, then go to lunch. So shorter break than usual, but 10 till. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we're back on the record. You remain under oath. And thank you, Mr. Goody.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Agent Sarai, you remember Mr. D'Angelo a while back saying this was unprecedented? You remember that word being used?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree this is an unprecedented event as far as the number of cars being involved, 62?
Yes, sir.
Number of officers being involved? And how many officers were involved in this, do you know? Over 100?
I know we interviewed over 70, as I recall.
Okay. And also it's unprecedented in the length of time, correct? 22 minutes?
There are some exceptions to that, but lengthy pursuit like this is the exception.
Correct. And you saw the video, right?
Yes, sir.
High speeds, correct?
Yes, sir.
Through residential neighborhoods?
Yes, sir.
Through major traffic?
Yes, sir.
Mr. D'Angelo asked you, well, no police officer cars got in accidents, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Well, he said, he didn't use this word, but civilian. He said
Civilian
police.
didn't get in an accident, my bad,
Yes.
correct?
There were no crashes during it.
And the only, well, strike that. So, for lack of better words, a minor miracle that there were no accidents going through this whole particular chase. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
The length of time, the number of officers, the speeds, the intersections, the stoplights. It is just by the grace of God that no civilians got hurt, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the police officers themselves, just during the chase, right?
Yes, sir.
So this was not any organized type of chase that was going on, correct?
Objection.
Can you repeat the question, sir?
This was no organized chase, was it?
No, sir.
There was no control over the situation, was there?
No, sir.
I mean, we saw a few intersections being stopped, right?
Yes, sir.
During your investigation, did you not find that some officers were paralleling this particular chase also?
Yes, sir.
And is that a dangerous tactic?
It could be.
Now, sir, Mr. D'Angelo went into some of the emotions that were emitted by the officers involved, correct? That you interviewed?
Yes, sir.
Did any of the officers ever offer their condolences to the victims that occurred here?
No, sir.
Anyone ever say, I'm sorry that, geez, we shot these people up and they didn't have a gun? Did anybody say that?
No, sir.
And sir, did the mention of Semper Fi ever come up in your conversations?
Yes, sir.
In what context?
During the course of the interviews, I believe it was one of the union members, union representatives, advised us that a cartoon had appeared at the district police station. It was a cartoon of Officer Brelo standing on the car. As I recall, we were told, holding a Marine Corps flag, gun in hand, shouting Semper Fi. The union officials advised us that Mr. Brelo had been the target of some, I don't want to say bullying, but he had been the target of some humor, and that cartoon had appeared there. Because of that, during the interview of Officer Brelo, he was asked if he had said Semper Fi while he was up there, and he emphatically said no.
And that was my next question. You asked him that.
Yes, sir, we
And
did.
you asked him that question based upon that information.
Yes, sir, we did.
So information was given to you that some people within CPD wasn't taking this as serious as it was supposed to be taken.
Objection to form,
That's There was information given to you that some people were actually making light of this situation right after it happened.
Objection.
Sustained.
So I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification purposes. Wait a minute. training as a police officer, now a special agent, would you agree with me that during these police encounters in general, mental issues come into play?
As far as what?
In any situations that sometimes mental issues may arise when the police officer's observations of the individuals? I'll withdraw that, Your Honor.
What's the objection based on? Because you don't know what he's asking? Because I don't, and that's why I can't figure out whether the objection's well taken.
Sir, you heard, by the way, let's get a couple facts straight. How many agents were involved in this investigation totally, you said at one point?
Initially, we probably had about 40 agents assigned.
Okay. And through your investigation, did you ever find a weapon, a gun? Did you ever find a gun?
In what context?
In this case, a gun from these individuals.
No, sir, we did not.
Okay. Did the analysis of the gunshots of the Malibu indicate anybody fired out of the Malibu?
I believe that was inconclusive because of the volume of gunshot rounds.
I'm talking about the shots going out.
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, let me ask the witnesses. Did you understand what he meant when he asked the question?
When he clarified it now, yes, sir, I did.
Is your answer different?
Yes, sir. He's asking whether or not is found whether, through looking at the windshield by the glass fracturing, if there had been any indication of shots coming from the inside of the vehicle outward.
Right.
I don't recall there being any located that way.
So there's no gun found on the route, correct?
Correct, sir.
There was no gun found in the car, correct?
Correct.
So there was no gun that you could find, that BCI could find, that the suspect supposedly had that night, correct?
Correct, sir.
So there was a mistake being made by the police, whether reasonable or not, that there was a gun involved here, correct?
Well, what do you mean whether reasonable or not? Your expert said it was reasonable.
Okay.
That's true, Your Honor.
There was a reasonable belief that there was a gun,
Yes, sir.
but we never found it.
Correct.
So that belief, even though being reasonable, was mistaken, correct?
Yes, sir.
Sir, Mr. D'Angelo went through the questions answered about how the union brought people down and things of that nature, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of the fact that the same individuals asked to testify in the grand jury and they refused based upon the advice of counsel?
Objection.
The same individuals.
The shooters, 12 shooters.
Objection is overruled.
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you know that there were non-shooters that also took advice of counsel and exercised their Fifth Amendment right? Are you aware of that?
Yes, sir, I am.
Yeah, my tongue goes too fast sometimes. All right. Okay. Getting back to the gun, you're aware the CPD looked for the gun, correct?
Yes, sir.
In a number of places.
Yes, sir.
In fact, that night they looked for the gun.
Yes, sir.
You and your
fellow agents, as well as what CPD you said initially looked for the gun.
Yes, sir.
And you looked the whole route for a gun, correct?
Yes, sir.
You could not find one, right?
That is correct, sir.
So there was a lot of effort expended to try to find a gun. Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to show you Mark States Exhibit 1210. Please put up. Have you ever seen this before?
No, sir.
Has this ever come involved in any of your investigation that it came out?
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, he said he's never seen it. It's sustained.
Was that ever provided to the state, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
So you know no background for this particular cartoon?
No, sir.
All right. Sir, Mr. D'Angelo went through some individuals that were upset during their interviews.
Yes, sir.
Would it be fair to say that not all the people were upset during their interviews?
I believe the majority of them did break down and get emotional during it. There were a few that did not, though.
Okay. And this was in December and January when you were doing your interviews, correct?
This would have been December, yes, sir.
And that cartoon I just showed you up, you're not aware of the fact that that was on a 2nd District bulletin board in April? You're not aware of that fact?
No, sir. When the cartoon was brought to our attention was early on, that early part of December.
And we're talking about the Semper Fi one,
Yes.
not the one I just showed you.
No, sir.
Okay. All right.
Sir, Mr. D'Angelo went through some things with you regarding the actions of Mr. Brelo that night, correct? You remember that?
Yes, sir.
All right. And Officer Brelo indicated that he was here, then here, and he doesn't remember being on the hood.
Yes, sir.
Mr. D'Angelo asked you, well, he never denied it, correct? You remember, Mr.?
That's correct,
But he
sir.
didn't admit it either.
No, sir, he didn't.
And, sir, through your training and experience, has anybody ever trained you, or have you ever, and you're a teacher, trainer, correct, yourself, correct?
Yes, sir.
Ever trained anybody to jump on hoods during the middle of a firefight?
No, sir. Never trained anybody that way.
So let's talk about Officer Brelo's perceptions that he told you at the time he was back here. Okay, can we go over that for a second?
Yes, sir.
All right, indicated he made it to here, right?
Yes, sir. Behind 238.
he had time to assess the fact that he knew people were over here.
Objection, Your Honor.
To his left, by the way, for the
Right, I'm
record.
pointing
Thank
to-
you, sir, for the last time.
Thank you.
you noted.
Correct?
But it is true, this is still direct, keep that in mind. So the objection is sustained.
Did Officer Brelo indicate to you he had time to assess certain factors that were going around here at this point in time?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes, sir, he did.
And what were those assessments?
He noted that there were officers off to his left,
Pointing over here, correct?
with the green hill, with the hill behind him. He also noted that he could see into the passenger compartment and still see movement inside the Malibu.
Did he also indicate to you he knew that there was crossfire going on?
He indicated that he was afraid of that based on the officers off to his left, yes.
And did he not indicate to you, sir, that he felt that he was going to be pinned underneath here?
Yes, sir. He was afraid the Malibu would move and push the Crown Victoria on top of him.
In fact, that was his words, pinned.
He did say that he was afraid he'd be pinned under 238. He also said that he was afraid he would be sucked under 238 if the car were to move.
Said any other assessments that he indicated to you at that point?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Then at that point, he made a decision, correct? To go up on top of the trunk. Is that not correct?
Yes, sir, he did.
Even though he knew there was crossfire coming.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did he know that there was crossfire coming when he made that decision?
Objection.
Sustained. I've been listening. You don't have to preview your closing argument in a redirect a witness. I mean, ask him about his observations, his perceptions, the things he's competent to testify to.
Sir, did he indicate to you at any point in time that there was a crossfire situation?
Objection.
Sustained.
Let me ask you this. Through your investigation, did you determine at any point in time, based upon where the officers were, if there was a crossfire situation going on?
Mr. or Agent Soraya has testified on direct and I think on cross, I think both times, that the defendant told him a reason he climbed up on a vehicle was to get some, I'm paraphrasing, protection from possible crossfire. So what you're asking for is in evidence at least twice. What is it accomplished to get in evidence 3, 4, 5, 6 times?
Nothing, Your Honor.
So the objection is sustained.
Sir, in your training experience, and based upon the fact that you've investigated multiple police shootings, have you ever experienced or seen an officer getting up on an elevated position to put himself in a crossfire situation?
Objection.
Overruled.
No, sir.
And in this situation, based upon the facts and circumstances that you have gleaned from this particular case, did he not in fact put himself in a situation where he could have gotten shot?
Yes, sir.
And if he had gotten shot, explain to the court how that would have affected that situation.
I don't understand your question here.
I'm
If he would have
saying
gotten shot,
If he got shot on top of the trunk here, how would that affected the situation and the reaction times of what all the officers would needed to do at that point in time?
if he would have gotten shot, providing other officers saw him go down, other officers would have probably gone to remove him from that situation to get him to cover.
Would that not in fact created another situation?
Objection.
Overruled.
there is a high potential that seeing an officer go down would have increased the emotional response and directed more fire to the car.
Okay.
Objection will be struck.
Overruled, but I really don't. I'm not sure this is a matter of prime importance, but go ahead. Go ahead.
One more question, Agent Soraya. As you speak today, would it be a fair statement to say that the only individual that put Mr. Officer Brelo on the hood was Officer Cibola?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No more further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Do you have any recross based only on what has been inquired of since you last inquired, Mr. D'Angelo?
Yes. Can I have the cartoon exhibit or whatever we got there?
1210?
We didn't use it, but we didn't put the number on it. There isn't any. But we can put it on the Mondo pad if you want.
No, this is fine. May I approach with this, Ron?
Sure.
Showing you State's Exhibit 1210. That's the,
We actually didn't put it in, right, 1210, because he
No,
couldn't.
I know it's not in evidence, but it was, the witness was inquired of about